They say time heals everything. But what happens when time itself becomes the witness that refuses to speak? When detectives entered that house on a foggy October morning, they thought it was a break-in gone wrong. A random act of violence. But within minutes, they realized this was no ordinary crime. The scene was too clean. The silence, too deliberate. One of the officers later said it felt like the house was watching them. And even now, decades later, no one knows who did it, or why. It happened in a town where nothing ever happened. A quiet place, where neighbors waved, doors stayed unlocked, and everyone thought they knew everyone. Until one night, they didn't. A woman found brutally murdered inside her own home. No forced entry. No signs of struggle. No fingerprints. The police searched for months. Leads vanished. Evidence evaporated. The case went cold. But the story never did. Because every few years, someone new moves into that house. And they say, at night, they can still hear the ticking clock that stopped the moment she died. 30 years later, the bloodstains are gone, but the questions remain. Who killed her? And how did a single crime become a town's darkest secret? Like, subscribe and turn on bell notifications, so you won't miss any upcoming crime stories on Midnight Tales. Let's dive in. Maple Hollow wasn't the kind of place where bad things happened. It sat tucked between quiet hills and endless pine woods, a small, sleepy town where everyone knew your name, your habits, and your history. The streets were lined with oak trees that turned golden in October, and the only sounds most nights were crickets and the occasional bark of a neighbor's dog. People here didn't lock their doors. They trusted the silence. And maybe that's why what happened next hit them so hard, because evil didn't belong here. It had to come from somewhere else. Her name was Eleanor Sharp. 42 years old. A teacher at the local elementary school. The kind of woman people described with soft words, gentle, patient, kind. She'd lived on Maple Drive for almost 15 years, in a small, cream-colored house with white shutters and a garden she tended herself. Every spring, she'd plant rows of marigolds and daisies, and the smell would drift through the neighborhood. Children adored her. Colleagues respected her. Parents trusted her. There wasn't a person in town who had a reason to hate Eleanor Sharp. But inside her personal journal, investigators later found something unsettling. In the weeks before her death, Eleanor had written that she felt uneasy. One entry read, "Lately I feel like someone's been outside my window. I keep hearing footsteps at night. Maybe it's just my mind playing tricks on me." She never told anyone about it, not her friends, not her family. But she did tell one person. Her best friend, Marion Hayes, told police that the last time she spoke to Eleanor, just 3 days before her death, she sounded distracted. Marion recalled, she said she kept seeing the same blue car parked across the street. Every night, around 9. The engine is running. Lights off. She laughed it off, but I could tell she was scared. The strange thing was, no one else ever reported seeing that car. No neighbors. No passers-by. And when police later checked, there were no vehicles matching her description ever registered in town. To everyone else, Eleanor's life seemed ordinary. Predictable. She woke at 6 each morning, brewed her tea, left for school by 7:30. After classes, she'd stop at the same grocery store, pick up a magazine from the stand, and walk home. On weekends, she volunteered at the church, taught Sunday school, and mailed handwritten letters to her sister in Maine. It was a routine life, one built on consistency. But consistency can hide patterns. Detective Alan Mercer, who later led the investigation, would say, if someone wanted to learn Eleanor's habits, they could do it in a week. She never changed them. Same routes. Same timing. Same faces. That routine, so ordinary, may have made her the perfect target. The people of Maple Hollow remember that fall vividly. The air was cooler than usual. The sunsets are shorter. And in the days leading up to the tragedy, there were little things, details that seemed meaningless at first. Someone's garbage bin tipped over at midnight. A motion sensor light flicked on, but no one was there. The sound of gravel shifting, as if someone had stepped too close to a window. A few neighbors even said they heard whispers near the woods behind Eleanor's house. Low voices, maybe a man and a woman, arguing, then silence. But no one called the police. After all, this was Maple Hollow. Nothing bad ever happened here. On the evening of October 17, 1992, Eleanor returned home at her usual time, 7:42 p.m. She carried a paper bag of groceries, waved to Mrs. Delaney across the street, and disappeared into her house. The porch light came on at 8 o'clock. By 9:15, it went out. The next morning, she didn't show up to class. Her car was still in the driveway. Her phone rang, unanswered. The principal assumed she'd taken a sick day. But her closest friend, Marion, said something didn't feel right. Marion drove to the house just after noon. The blinds were drawn. Mail still in the box. She knocked on the door. No answer. She walked around back, saw the kitchen light flickering through the curtain. That's when she noticed something else. Eleanor's garden gate was open. And the soil around her marigolds had been disturbed. When police arrived hours later, they found no forced entry. Everything inside seemed untouched. No sign of a struggle. Nothing stolen. Except for one thing. Her journal. The last page was torn out completely. Later that night, Detective Mercer would recall seeing something written in the dust on the windowsill. Just 2 words, faint but visible under the flashlight. I know. In a town that prided itself on knowing everyone's story. Someone knew hers a little too well. She told her friend she felt watched that week, as if someone was following her home. And she was right. The day before her death began like any other. Friday, October 16, 1992. Eleanor woke early, 6:04 a.m., as always. She marked it in her journal, noting, strange dreams again. Can't shake the feeling I'm being watched. She brewed her tea, fed her cat, and sat by the kitchen window, her usual ritual. From there, she could see the street, the empty driveway, the line of tall pines that bordered her backyard. But that morning, she saw something new. A shoe print. Just one. Pressed into the damp soil near her back fence. She brushed it off as nothing. Maybe a neighbor. Maybe the mailman. But later, detectives would confirm, no one had reason to be there. Throughout the day, she seemed distracted. Her coworker, Lydia Grant, told police that Eleanor kept glancing at the windows during class, her eyes distant. She was teaching math to the kids, Lydia said, but halfway through the lesson, she just stopped. She was staring at the playground fence, like she saw something moving. That evening, she left the school at 7:12 p.m. Security cameras, old VHS footage, showed her walking to her car, carrying her usual tote bag. Nothing unusual. But a dark sedan appeared 3 seconds after she pulled out. No license plate visible. It followed her car until the footage ended at the edge of town. She arrived home at 7:42 p.m. Neighbors saw her wave, unlock her front door, and disappear inside. The porch light flicked on. The curtain closed. At 8 p.m., Mrs. Delaney across the street said she heard a strange tapping sound, metal against glass, coming from Eleanor's house. Tap, tap, tap. She assumed it was the branches hitting the window. But when police later checked the weather that night, there was no wind strong enough to move those trees. At 9:03 p.m., a jogger passing through Maple Drive reported hearing what he described as a low hum, like a generator. No one in the neighborhood owned one. Then came 9:27 p.m. A sound that several neighbors remembered but couldn't identify. Something sharp. Suddenly. Like glass shattering, followed by absolute silence. At 9:46 p.m., Eleanor's phone rang. Her sister called, but no one answered. She tried again 10 minutes later. Still no answer. That was the last call Eleanor Sharp ever received. At 10:03 p.m., a light in her bedroom flickered twice, then stayed on. At 10:18 p.m., the same blue sedan was seen again, parked 3 houses down, engine idling. A neighbor, Mr. Calvin Brooks, remembered walking his dog at the time. He said the driver never looked up, just sat there, staring at the house. When I passed by, Brooks told detectives, he rolled up the window. I couldn't see his face, just a shape, sitting still, like he didn't even blink. By 10:33 p.m., the rain stopped. The air went still. And at 10:47 p.m., the lights in Eleanor's house went out. No one saw her alive again. The next morning, everything looked normal. The mail was still on the porch. The car in the driveway. But there was one thing, one small, almost invisible thing, that the first officer noticed when he stepped inside. A faint smell of lavender. Eleanor's favorite candle scent. It had been burning all night. But no candle was found anywhere in the house. The first responders described the scene as eerily peaceful. The dining table was set for one. A cup of tea sat half-finished, still faintly warm. The clock above the mantel stopped at 10:47 p.m. There were no signs of forced entry. No overturned furniture. No broken locks. Only the faint outline of a handprint on the inside of the front window. A handprint that didn't belong to Eleanor. The coroner later confirmed her time of death, sometime between 10:45 and 11 p.m. But that wasn't what haunted Detective Mercer. It was what they found in the kitchen sink. The water had been left running at a slow trickle. And at the bottom of the drain was a single earring. Not Eleanor's. It was small, silver, and shaped like a crescent moon. Forensics tested it. No fingerprints. No DNA. It didn't match anyone they knew. The killer had taken nothing else. Not her jewelry. Not her money. Not even her watch. Everything about the crime scene screamed control. Whoever did this, didn't come to steal. They came to send a message. That night, the entire town of Maple Hollow slept peacefully, completely unaware that one of their own had been murdered just a few streets away. And in that silence, the clock on Maple Drive never ticked again. By dawn, Eleanor Sharp was gone. And whatever happened inside that house between 10:03 and 10:47 p.m. Only two beings in the world would ever truly know. Eleanor. And her killer. When police arrived hours later, the world outside still looked the same, sunlight cutting through thin mist, the smell of wet earth, the hum of distant traffic. But inside that little cream-colored house, time had stopped. Forever. Next, we follow the first officers through that front door. Into a crime scene that would baffle detectives for decades. Because what they found defied logic. October 17, 1992. The town of Maple Hollow woke beneath a pale sun, its light cutting through thin ribbons of mist. To everyone else, it was just another Saturday. But for Officer Daniel Mercer, it would be the morning that would haunt him for the rest of his life. At 7:42 a.m., a call came through dispatch. Neighbor reports something off at 214 Maple Drive. Mail piling up. Curtains drawn. No answer at the door. Mercer was the first to arrive. He'd known Eleanor for years, she used to babysit his sister. He parked across the street, stepped out into the cold, and noticed right away. The front lawn was untouched, except for a single trail of footprints leading from the driveway to the back door. He walked up to the porch. The morning air smelled faintly of lavender, the same scent that would later be listed in his report. He knocked once. Twice. Called her name. "Miss Sharp." "It's Dan Mercer." "You all right in there?" No answer. But there was something else. The soft, rhythmic sound of water dripping. He circled to the back, tried the rear door. It was locked. So was the front. Windows, shut tight. Curtains drawn. Mercer called for backup. 2 more units arrived minutes later. Together, they forced the door. Inside, the air was cold. Still. Like the house had exhaled, and never breathed in again. The first thing they noticed was the smell, faint perfume mixed with something metallic. Blood. Not much. Just enough to stain the edge of the hallway carpet. Mercer moved toward the kitchen. The sink was still running, the same trickle reported in his notes. He turned the handle. The dripping stopped. On the counter, a half-eaten slice of toast. Cold tea. And beside it, her phone, untouched, face down. He flipped it over. No missed calls. No messages. But her journal lay open on the table, pen still resting across the page. The last thing she wrote was dated the night before. 10:15 p.m., I think he's outside again. They moved deeper into the house. Everything was neat. Almost unnaturally neat. No signs of struggle. No shattered glass. No overturned furniture. Then, in the living room, they saw her. Eleanor Sharp was found seated upright on the sofa. Her hands folded neatly in her lap. Eyes open. And the faintest trace of a smile on her lips. The medical examiner later confirmed she had been dead for nearly 9 hours. But what froze Mercer wasn't her body. It was the mirror. Hanging across from the sofa, its surface coated in a thin layer of dust. And written across it, in that dust, were 3 words. He still watches. Mercer's first instinct was that it was old writing. Maybe from before. But when the team examined it, they realized. The message had been written that night. The edges of the letters were smudged by a trembling finger, dragging through fresh dust that hadn't had time to settle. Forensics took samples, but no fingerprints. The glass was wiped clean, just beneath the words. Upstairs, another officer called out. "Detective. You need to see this." In Eleanor's bedroom, the bed was neatly made. Nothing disturbed. Except a small jewelry box left open on the dresser. Inside it, every piece of jewelry she owned. Except for one earring. The silver crescent moon. Mercer wrote in his notes that the air upstairs felt different. Thick. Heavy. Like static before a storm. He noticed something else. The window near the bed was locked from the inside, yet the sill carried faint mud smudges, as though someone had stood there, or climbed in. No footprints outside. No ladder. Just those faint smears, and a single strand of hair caught on the latch. When they checked the hallway clock, it had stopped at 10:47 p.m., the exact minute her lights went out. There were no defensive wounds on her body. No sign she fought back. No forced entry. It was as if she'd simply stopped living. The coroner ruled it sudden cardiac arrest under suspicious circumstances. But one detail remained unexplained. There was a faint burn mark across her right palm, circular, the size of a coin. It wasn't from fire. Not acid. Just heat. Concentrated. Almost as if she'd touched something metallic. Later that afternoon, as detectives combed the house for clues, they noticed something peculiar in the basement. At first glance, it looked empty, bare concrete, dust, old boxes. But on the wall near the fuse box, someone had carved shallow letters into the paint. 3 simple marks. 10:47. The exact time everything ended. Mercer stared at it for a long time. Later, he would tell reporters he didn't even notice his hands were shaking until his partner whispered, "Dan, the fuse box. Look at the switch." The main breaker was off, flipped manually. Which meant, whoever killed Eleanor had turned off the power from inside the house. And yet, when the coroner logged the body, the door was still locked from the inside. It was the first time in his 18-year career that Mercer wrote the words, "Unexplainable." By 3 p.m., the scene was sealed off. Reporters began to gather outside the yellow tape. The story spread fast. Local teacher found dead in locked home, mysterious writing found on mirror. Theories erupted overnight: cult activity, stalking, psychological breakdown. But none of them could explain how the front door was locked from the inside. Or how her tea was still warm when the coroner arrived 9 hours later. The crime scene techs took everything: her journal, her phone, the candle wax residue on the counter. Every trace was catalogued, sealed, and boxed away. Except for one thing Mercer pocketed before the others noticed. A small slip of paper, folded beneath the sofa cushion. On it, scrawled in hurried, uneven handwriting were the words, "If I don't make it, tell him I saw it again." No signature. No date. Just that note. The case was officially opened as the Sharp homicide investigation. But as the hours turned into days, and the clues began to contradict each other, one truth became painfully clear. This wasn't just a murder. It was something deeper. Something orchestrated. Because in a locked house, with no sign of a break-in, Eleanor Sharp had died in fear of something she'd been seeing. Long before anyone else believed her. And whatever it was, might still be watching. Detective Henry Lyle was assigned to lead the case. He was methodical, patient, the kind of man who could stare at a wall of evidence for hours, waiting for it to talk back. But this time, the wall stayed silent. Lyle had worked homicide for 17 years. He'd seen stabbings, fires, staged suicides. Yet the Sharp case was different. It didn't move the way others did. Every clue he found seemed to cancel out another. At precisely 9:12 a.m., the day after the body was found, forensic reports began trickling in. No fingerprints except Eleanor's. No signs of forced entry. No evidence of a struggle. And strangest of all, no trace of anyone else in the house. DNA samples from the hair on the window latch? Inconclusive. The strand didn't match anyone in their database. Not even Eleanor herself. But there was something. A partial shoe print near the basement steps. Faint. Almost missed. A men's size 10, brand discontinued in 1989. Detective Lyle leaned back, staring at the evidence board. Photographs. Maps. Timelines. But no answers. The next step was interviews. And in this town, everyone had a story. Suspect 1, Daniel Mercer, the first responder. "Detective, I told you, I didn't touch anything I didn't have to." Lyle's voice, calm, steady. "Then how do you explain the missing earring?" Mercer pauses. She wasn't wearing any jewelry when I found her." Lyle notes it down. Mercer's prints were everywhere: the door, the counter, the sofa. But that was expected. He'd entered first. What bothered Lyle was Mercer's reaction to the mirror. According to his partner, he went pale the moment he saw the words "he still watches." When asked why, Mercer said quietly, "Because I've seen that phrase before." In 1986, 6 years earlier, Mercer had responded to another death in town, a man found dead in his garage, apparent suicide. On the wall near the body, written in dust, "He still watches." The case? Unsolved. Lyle circled Mercer's name twice on his notepad. But Mercer wasn't the only one with secrets. Suspect 2, Ryan Holbrook, Eleanor's ex-boyfriend. A local mechanic. Rough voice, chain smoker, history of temper issues. He told detectives they hadn't spoken in over 2 years. But phone records told another story. A call made from Holbrook's number to Eleanor's home 3 days before her death. When confronted, he claimed it was a pocket dial. But then came something stranger, the timestamp didn't match. The call was logged at 2:17 a.m. Holbrook insisted he was asleep. So police requested the cell tower data. And found the signal came from less than 300 feet from Eleanor's house. "I swear I wasn't there," he said, his voice trembling. "I drive by that street all the time for work." "At 2 in the morning?" Lyle asked. Holbrook didn't answer. He just looked down at the table, and whispered. "She was seeing someone else, wasn't she?" His alibi checked out, mostly. His coworker confirmed he clocked in at 7 a.m. sharp that morning. But there was still a 5-hour window unaccounted for. And then came the next name. Suspect 3, Grace Holloway, Eleanor's closest friend and colleague at the library. Grace described Eleanor as bright, kind, a bit lonely. She mentioned Eleanor had been nervous the week before, jumpy, distracted, locking up early. She said she felt watched, Grace admitted. Like someone was outside the house, waiting. But there was something Grace didn't mention in her first interview. A week later, during a follow-up, Lyle discovered Eleanor had confided something to her, a secret. Grace finally confessed. "She told me she found something in the woods behind her house. Something buried." Lyle leaned forward. "What was it?" Grace hesitated. "A box. Small. Metal. But she didn't open it. She said she'd bring it to the police, the next day. The next day, she was dead." Search teams combed the area Grace mentioned, but no box was ever found. Then, a new lead, forensics from Eleanor's fingernails. Tiny fragments of paint and metallic residue. The lab couldn't identify the source, but the composition was similar to oxidized aluminum. "Maybe from that box," Lyle muttered in his report. By now, 3 suspects, no confession, and a dozen dead ends. But on the 10th day, something broke the monotony. A neighbor came forward, Mrs. Calder, 74 years old. She claimed she saw a man standing by Eleanor's window the night before the murder. Tall, she said. Maybe 6 foot. Wore a dark coat. Didn't move. Just stood there. Lyle pressed for details. "Could you see his face?" "No," she said softly. "But I'll never forget his hands." "Why?" "Because they were gloved. But shining. Like metal." Lyle sat back. The residue on Eleanor's hands. The metallic burn. It was starting to connect. But before he could act, the forensics team sent over new data. The timestamp on the security camera footage from the gas station where Holbrook claimed to be that night. The footage showed him there at 10:30 p.m., just as he said. But there was one problem. The station clock was 7 minutes slow. Which meant, when Holbrook was pumping gas, Eleanor's lights were already going out. He couldn't have been both places at once. Unless the footage was tampered with. Lyle stared at the timeline pinned to his board, every second accounted for, every lead leading nowhere. But one thought wouldn't leave his mind. The message on the mirror. He still watches. Who was he? And how did Eleanor know him well enough to fear him? For the first time since the investigation began, Lyle turned off the recorder and leaned back in his chair. "We're missing something," he whispered. "Something right in front of us." Outside, the rain started again. And somewhere, in a box of evidence sealed and forgotten, a clue waited. One that would resurface years later and reopen everything they thought they knew about the murder of Eleanor Sharp. Subscribe if you have not, so you won't miss any upcoming crime stories from Midnight Tales. Every murder investigation begins with questions. But in this town, the questions started turning on each other. By the 5th week of the investigation, Detective Ruiz had interviewed almost everyone within a 3-mile radius of Evelyn Moore's home. Friends, neighbors, co-workers. And the more people he spoke to, the less the story made sense. Some said Evelyn was cheerful that week, preparing a small dinner for her sister. Others said she'd been distant, paranoid, certain someone was following her. One neighbor, Mrs. Lorne, insisted she'd seen Evelyn arguing with a man outside her porch 2 nights before the murder. But another swore she was away visiting her aunt that same night. The accounts didn't just contradict each other, they cancelled each other out. Ruiz wrote in his notes, "Someone's lying. Maybe all of them." In a town this small, rumors travel faster than truth. Within days, the local cafe had turned into a crime forum. Everyone had a theory. The ex-boyfriend. The quiet co-worker. The delivery driver who disappeared the next morning. But whispers began to shift, from suspects, to the police themselves. Why was nothing adding up? Why did evidence seem to vanish after being logged? Someone was leaking information. Someone close. Detective Ruiz confronted his team, quietly, one by one. But in small-town departments, trust is currency, and once it's broken, everything stops working. Then came the first real break. A witness, Evelyn's co-worker, Amanda Blake, stepped forward with something she'd kept to herself. She said Evelyn had received strange phone calls weeks before her death. The caller never spoke, but would breathe, slow, heavy, rhythmic. The police traced the calls. All 3 came from disposable phones. But one of those numbers was active again, a few days after the murder. And it was used to contact someone already in the police file, Evelyn's close friend, Harold Greer. Harold was known as kind, quiet, a friend to everyone. He'd even helped carry Evelyn's casket. But now, detectives saw him differently. When they brought him in for questioning, he smiled, calm, almost amused. Said he barely knew Evelyn, just from church. Yet her phone records told another story. Dozens of calls. Late-night messages. Detectives found a note in Evelyn's journal that read, "HG said it'll stop soon. I hope he's right." When asked about the note, Harold denied everything. Claimed he hadn't spoken to her in months. But here's where it got strange, his alibi. He said he'd been home, watching an old movie. Alone. Police obtained his building's security footage to confirm. The cameras showed Harold entering his apartment at 9:48 p.m., and never leaving. But when they checked the timestamp, they discovered the recording was from the night before. That discovery cracked the case wide open, and yet, it didn't lead anywhere new. Because when police tried to re-question Harold the next morning, he was gone. His apartment had been cleared out. His phone disconnected. Only one thing remained on his kitchen counter. A photograph of Evelyn, torn cleanly in half. That was the moment the investigation began collapsing in on itself. Every suspect, every witness, seemed to lead into another dead end. Files disappeared. Key evidence, missing. The detectives realized, this wasn't just a murder case anymore. It was a web. And someone, somewhere, was making sure no one ever found the center. But there was one last piece the police hadn't examined closely enough. A missing camera. Evelyn's old handheld, the one she used to document everything. When detectives finally located it, tucked in a box in evidence storage. The SD card slot was empty. All the footage from that night was gone. And for the first time, Detective Ruiz wondered if someone inside the department was pulling the strings. Someone who wanted the case to stay unsolved. But who, and why? Police have not confirmed any suspects at this time, but the investigation into the Moore homicide remains open. Years passed. Evidence was boxed, sealed, and stored away. Detectives transferred. Families moved on. But not everyone forgot. In small towns, memories have a way of whispering their way into the present. And as the years stretched into decades, 3 theories emerged, each one darker than the last. The first theory, the one most people still believe, is that Evelyn Moore knew her killer. Friends described her as kind, but private. She kept her circle small, her secrets smaller. There were rumors of a quiet relationship, someone who wasn't supposed to exist in her life. Detectives later discovered letters hidden inside a hollow space behind her dresser drawer. No name. No address. Just initials, HG. The same initials found in her final journal entry. The handwriting was shaky, desperate. If he comes again, I'll tell someone. I have to. But she never did. Those who believe this theory say Harold Greer, the missing friend, was obsessed. That he planned it for months, stalking her, manipulating her, convincing her no one would believe her. When he vanished after the murder, it only seemed to confirm it. But if that were true, why did his car turn up over 300 miles away, in another state, weeks before she died? The timeline didn't fit. And neither did the motive. The second theory came years later, when another case emerged just 2 towns over. A young teacher, found dead in her home. No signs of forced entry. No fingerprints. No DNA. And on her bedroom mirror, a faint smear of dust, shaped like a single word, listen. Detectives couldn't ignore the parallels. The staging. The precision. The silence. Both women had reported hearing phone calls, breathing, never words. Both lived alone. Both were found on the anniversary of Evelyn Moore's death. But the message, listen, suggested something deeper. Police theorized a ritualistic connection, a pattern. Old case files began surfacing, each pointing to unsolved deaths across nearby counties, all with eerily similar details. Locked doors. Cold rooms. Clock hands stopped at different hours. Coincidence? Or was someone keeping a tradition alive? Still, without physical proof, the copycat theory faded, leaving behind only more unease. The third theory is the one police refuse to talk about. Because it points not outward, but inward. According to a 2002 whistleblower report, several items from the Moore case, including her camera and one sealed evidence bag, were deliberately misplaced by someone in the department. The report was anonymous. The source, never confirmed. But in the margins of that report were 3 words, scrawled in ink. He still calls. Investigators who reopened the file noticed something else, a log entry made 2 days after the murder, timestamped 11:06 p.m. It simply read: Property secured by Deputy H.G. Those same initials. Harold Greer. But he wasn't a deputy. He was never employed by the department. So who made that entry, and why did it stay hidden for years? Some believe Evelyn discovered something, a secret buried inside the town's own law enforcement. Something worth killing for. Others think the truth is simpler. That obsession turned to violence, and time turned that violence into legend. But the third theory, the one that threads them all together, changes everything. Because in the archived 911 logs, there's an unaccounted call made at 10:48 p.m., the night Evelyn died. The call lasted exactly 6 seconds. No one spoke. But in the background, there was breathing. And beneath that, a faint, mechanical ticking. Like a clock. Some say that's when it all started. Others say that's when it ended. Either way, the questions remain. Who was behind it? How deep did the cover-up go? And perhaps most haunting of all, was the killer ever truly gone? Or just waiting for the next anniversary to come around? Decades passed. Detectives retired. Witnesses aged. The case was boxed away in the archives of Hollow Creek County, file number 1173-C. Forgotten, like dust settling on silence. But time doesn't erase everything. Sometimes, it leaves traces. Tiny fingerprints on memory, waiting for the right moment to be seen. In 2022, the case resurfaced. A young detective named Laura Kendrick, newly assigned to cold cases, stumbled across the Moore file during a digital conversion project. What caught her attention wasn't the murder itself, but a line scribbled in red pen on the inside of the folder. Recheck DNA when tech improves. The note was dated 1998. Signed by Detective Ruiz. Laura ordered the samples sent to the state crime lab for retesting, modern technology that could see what the old methods couldn't. Weeks passed. Then, one morning, she got the call. The lab had found something. The DNA from beneath Evelyn Moore's fingernails didn't match any known profile in the criminal database. But when cross-referenced against newer public ancestry systems, it found a familial link. The match wasn't a stranger. It was a relative. A direct biological connection to Detective Ruiz. Ruiz had passed away in 2009. A respected officer. Commendations, community service, a flawless record. His family had lived quietly in the same county for generations. His son, Daniel Ruiz, had joined the same department in 2015, ironically, in the cold case unit. When Laura approached Daniel with the results, he didn't speak for several seconds. Then he said something she never forgot. "I always wondered why my father never let me near that file. But the DNA didn't prove guilt. Only connection." Ruiz's genetic marker could have been transferred, by accident, through evidence handling. A contaminated sample. A simple error. Still, one question remained. Why was Detective Ruiz the one who sealed the evidence the night it was found? And why was the original log entry missing from the database? In a forgotten subfolder on the precinct server, she found a digital copy of the initial crime scene photos. Images thought to be destroyed decades ago. And in one of those photos, something chilling emerged. On Evelyn's desk, half hidden beneath a stack of unpaid bills, was a torn piece of paper. With a single name scrawled across it. Ruiz. Was it a plea for help? A warning? Or had someone planted it to deflect suspicion? Laura couldn't be sure. But she noticed something else in that photo. A reflection in the mirror across from the desk. A figure. Blurred. Half-turned. Standing in the doorway behind Evelyn. Seconds before the picture was taken. Experts examined the reflection. The shape of the shoulder patch. The outline of the badge. It wasn't Evelyn. It wasn't Harold. It was a police uniform. Someone inside the department had been there, moments before she died. Laura presented her findings quietly, off record, to her superior. A week later, her access to the cold case files was revoked. The report she submitted never appeared in the system. And 2 months after that, a fire broke out in the evidence storage wing of the Hollow Creek Police Department. The Moore file, along with several others, was destroyed. Officially, the cause was listed as an electrical malfunction. Unofficially, the timing was too precise. What happened next turned the case from tragedy to legend. Laura received an unmarked envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single item. A photograph of Evelyn Moore, smiling. On the back, in handwriting eerily similar to Ruiz's, were 5 words. It was never supposed to happen. For a moment, she thought she was being warned. But as she looked closer at the photo, she realized Evelyn wasn't alone. In the blurred background stood another figure, half in shadow. Wearing a Hollow Creek police badge. The truth, it seems, was never meant to be solved. Every file, every photo, every whisper, points to one simple fact. Evelyn Moore didn't just die because someone wanted her gone. She died because she saw something. Something that still matters to someone, even now. In the end, the DNA raised more questions than it answered. Was Detective Ruiz protecting someone? Or hiding from what he'd already done? We may never know. But one truth remains. The killer didn't just vanish. They were part of the very system built to find them. Time doesn't erase the past. It buries it. One file at a time. The town that once whispered her name now barely remembers the sound of it. The house on Willow Creek was sold years ago, stripped of its wallpaper, its floors redone, its windows replaced. But if you stand there long enough, some say you can still hear the faint creak of her back door opening. The investigation died slowly. One lead after another, each colder than the last. Detectives retired. Files changed hands. Evidence was moved to storage, then forgotten. The people who once demanded answers learned to live without them. But no one ever stopped wondering. Her mother moved away. Her best friend stopped speaking to reporters. The lead investigator, he still drives past that old address once a year. He never gets out of the car. He just sits there, staring at the porch light that no longer turns on. And inside the police archives, among hundreds of unresolved crimes, her file sits alone on the bottom shelf of room 12B. The case number barely visible through a thin layer of dust. A name. A date. A mystery that time refused to solve. There's a strange kind of silence that follows an unsolved case. It doesn't scream, it lingers. It lives in the gaps between what we know and what we'll never learn. Because somewhere out there, someone remembers that night. Someone remembers what really happened. Someone remembers her scream. And that person is still breathing the same air as you and I. The cold case remains open, not in the files, but in the minds of those who refuse to forget. The murder that police couldn't solve became a story, one told in whispers, in nightmares, in the quiet hours of the night when truth and guilt sound the same. What do you think happened that night? Was it a stranger who slipped through the dark, or someone she once trusted with her life? Share your theory in the comments below. And if you seek the stories that never find peace, the shadows that never fade, join us again, here, on Midnight Tales.